I think you'd have to say, Jane, you're in rock bottom now. You, along with Brian Loughnane, who I will declare as my husband, you did the review into why the party lost federally under Scott Morrison. Now, of course, there's Aston. I doubt those recommendations you made have been implemented in the time between May last year and where we were Saturday night. But give us your top 5 things that have got to change.
So, yes, you're right. Those recommendations, and there were 49 of them, Peter, have not yet been implemented, but they have been adopted by the party, which I think is a very positive sign. That was only released just after Christmas, so it's only been a few months between then and the Aston by-election. But there were recommendations for the organisational wing of the party, for the professional wing of the party, and also for the parliamentary wing. I think that some of the most important ones were about renewing our membership base to make sure that we have a membership that is reflective of the community, that we make sure that we better engage with multicultural communities, with young people, with women in particular, and setting some targets about new membership, 50% targets for female membership, and also 50% target for female parliamentarians. That way we can better move towards reflecting the people for whom we wish to represent. So that's really number one. I've actually melded a few recommendations into one there. We also said that the parliamentary team needs to establish some values-based policies that are implementable, that are practical, tangible, and reflective of mainstream Australia's values and attitudes. And we recommended also a deep dive into those values and attitudes of Australians, of contemporary Australians, to make sure that our policy positions align with those attitudes and values.
Yeah, let me just jump in there though. And Jane,
yeah.
I think part of the problem you got yourself into on Saturday night was everybody went out from day one when Tudge said he was going and said, we've got to have a woman, right? And you ended up with a woman who was parachuted in Keneally-like to the seat. She worked really hard. I'm taking nothing away from her as a candidate, but she wasn't the right fit for that seat. And I think you get the best local for a seat, the best candidate for a seat, and the gender, I think, has got to be a secondary consideration. But also your point about values-based policy. I spoke to a few people and I thought they must be making it up. And I checked and double-checked today. There was not one announcement targeted for Aston, not one. Fight for this and fight for that, but nothing was put back on the table. Surely that's a mistake as well.
Well, it was largely a campaign that was about re-establishing infrastructure projects that had been cut by a Labor government, and also about dealing with the cost of living, which is, everybody told us in Aston, is the number one issue that people are facing right now. The problem is, of course, that the voters of Aston weren't really associating the cost of living pressures that they're feeling with decisions that the government are making. Now, would that have changed had it have been a by-election held next week after potentially another interest rate rise, or in 6 months' time after so many of those Aston voters have fallen from that mortgage cliff from fixed interest rates to variable interest rates? Potentially, attitudes may well have changed, and they would have shed that back to the government, but they didn't. And the government, look, let's face it, used the levers that they can pull. They gave us 5 weeks to get ready for this by-election. They already had a candidate on the ground who had some name recognition from the previous election. That was a very smart move for them to pre-select Mary Doyle. Rashina Campbell, I thought, was a terrific candidate. She was articulate, she was smart, she's capable. She worked so hard, and she was well supported by local party members. On election day, there was not a booth that wasn't manned by at least a dozen Liberal Party members. I think that's terrific. Unfortunately, though, that's what happens in a by-election. In an election, we've got to make sure that every booth is manned right across the country, right across the state, and for that we need membership renewal. That's so important. So it's those values-based policies that reflect the mainstream, but also we have to renew the party itself.